We are still continuing with the Gupta dynasty. As I mentioned earlier, for your information, that they made some development and good progress by leaps and bounds, and it was not one-sided, quite rounded up development in governance, expansion of territories, keeping people without causing any coercion, and then also thinking about the intellectual side of life, encouraging people to write, whether in prose or in verse, when the king was himself writing it. The Gupta period is almost seen as a utopian period in Indian history because perfection was attained in that period. I mentioned the Chinese traveler earlier, Fan Hian, a Buddhist pilgrim who came from China and visited India in circa 400 to 410 AD. And this is not only an imaginary tribute to Gupta period that it was a utopia. It was something of a utopia there. The population usually remained disadvantaged, but it means that all the population was not rich or wealthy, but they were living a comfortably peaceful life. There was no oppressive caste system which came later in Indian society, and peace and order prevailed. I think this is the greatest achievement of any ruler, if in a city, in a kingdom, in a country, peace and order continues to guide people. The society was industrious, as Fa Hien also tells us, and there were highly influential guilds. And let me explain guilds here. Guilds were like trading houses, what we call today Chamber of Commerce. Those were the guilds where all the traders will take a membership, and it will be regulated on an elaborate level for a system of quality control, pricing, distribution, and training for every craft and calling. So this is not too far to be a utopian era. The Fa Hien came back on Indian vessels sailing from Tamparalipiti in Bengal. So this also tells us that there was a good transportation system on waterways. And Brahman flourished, although the law of the Buddhism is not much known. And you know, the Fa Hien's account of India, Magadh, the old name for Bihar, is made to sound especially impressive. Buddhism still enjoyed support large sections of Indian opinion. The monasteries, the Buddhist monasteries, well endowed. Their monks could be numbered in thousands. 8 centuries after the Buddha, only Sri Lanka was more Buddhist than any other part of the subcontinent. There was a time when a request was made to build a monastery on the site of Buddha's enlightenment of Bodh Gaya, and it was meant like a tribute to great Buddha. Fa Hien was not much interested in political affairs, and so he says nothing of the Gupta court or Chandragupta II, Maharaja Dhiraja, because he was more in the public interest and the motivational forces for public life. Hinduism as a religion with specific doctrines and practices was still unrecognizable. Already the concepts of those of dharma, karma and transmigration, avagavan, believing that you can live many times. You will come back again and again and again and again to live. Today, these things are considered as purely Hindus, but at that point of time, it was not purely Hindus, but it was, I think, considered in the general public. With these three principles, life can be and could be easily lived. The question then comes to us that when we read about history, instead of Hinduism, scholars sometimes use the term Brahmanism to distinguish the pre-Bhakti orthodoxy of the post-Vedic from the teaching of the heterodox sects like Buddhism and Jains. So we also see that the liberalism of Buddhist thought was influential from Ashoka and afterwards than the Hinduism itself. And then there was this interesting concept that the Brahmins were attributed with the Brahma power to the Brahmans. So they were considered close to their gods. Dharma can be translated as religion, duty, order. Artha is wealth, politics, motive, and danda is the authority, coercion, government. So the cultural explorer, as Fahian was, his way as through an unlit cave whose sculpted figures traced with the fingertips and not unfamiliar, yet remains unrecognizable. And this means that Fahian did not go into many details of Ajanta or Ellora, these two caves that have an immense history carved in the stone. The Gupta sculptures were distinguished as strongly intellectual in flavor and composed deliberately on aesthetic objects. So the sculpture in this age became a base for the frescoes of Ajanta. Apart from this art and carving and inscriptions, all Sanskrit literature is so rich in metaphors, synonyms, allusions, double meanings, and all manner of grammatical and phonetic details. The satisfactory translation from Sanskrit to any other language is almost impossible. Khajuraho temples that you might have seen in some of the films or the pictures somewhere, where Kalidas lived and sang his songs. And the conformity of these Sanskrit-born religious, cultural, social, and political ideas rests case for India's national integrity in pre-Islamic times. Some thing can be said about that this increasingly research exercises in Sanskrit provided a very delicate diversion. It was partly the fault of the language itself, as language was perfected by great grammarian Panini, but it was spoken by few. Sanskrit was the victim of its own prestige. If it could not be understood universally, then how could it convey and communicate all the great thought that it had in its literature? Important works were there on astronomy and medicine, and they indicate the science was not neglected under the Guptas. The end of this rational thinking was the length of the solar year was calculated with a precision which even the Greeks had not achieved. and Indian mathematics was probably the most advanced in the world. That is why the number is still called Hindsa. It originates from India. The concept of zero made its very epigraphic debut, usually in the form of a dot. So, we can see that the findings were framed with such Sanskrit refinement to make them incomprehensible to all but the initiated. The craftsman remained ignorant of them, and the mathematician remained jealous of them. Later works on iconography, architecture, and painting are often cited to the examples of Sanskrit's contribution to applied science. Sanskrit's monopoly over the scholarship was not fatal to creativity or to the development of productive skills. Awareness of India as a territorial entity with a distinctive and shared religio-cultural heritage is clearly evident in this period. The question is that later Guptas like Samudra Gupta might impose some semblance of political unity. More topically, both these great cultural worlds were riven with rivalries as kings and princelings vied for hegemony as dynasties rose and fell with bewildering rapidity.